right, well, thank you so much and welcome everybody. I'm going to take you through an important topic, especially for technical people like who are most likely to attend this specific conference. And the topic is around, we often end up having to present some very technical results, whether it's an analysis from a project, it could be something around some data pipelines we're setting up, really doesn't matter what. But we often have to present that to an audience that's far less technical than we are, sometimes even a pure business audience. And the way we present that information to them has to be substantively different than how we would present it to ourselves or our peers. And so what I'm going to do is take you through and very quickly, because we've only got a half hour here, some of the tips from the book Winning the Room, which are around how to get your audience to understand what you found, grasp the implications of that information, and then ideally take action. Because at the end of the day, if we can't get our audience to take action, we're not going to get anywhere. So there's actually 3 general sections in the book. I'm going to touch on them in differing detail here. The first section is a little more strategic. It's around planning your presentation and taking the time to lay it out. The middle section is much more tactical. I'll only cover a few things here today, which is around how you might word things, how you might do some imagery. And then the last is on your final preparation and delivery, and I'll spend some time here. Now, to level set a little bit, this talk is about a live presentation to a non-technical audience. It's not specifically on data visualization, though there's a component of it. It's not explicitly on pure storytelling, though it is. It's about this live delivery to a non-technical audience. And a lot of my illustrations are going to be very simple for 2 reasons. One, it makes it easy for me to illustrate a very specific point. You could obviously implement a number of these suggestions using any kind of more sophisticated tool set that you wanted, but also the reality is 95% of the real world presentations today are some combination of Excel and PowerPoint, whether we love it or hate it. So at least this will look familiar for you. So with that, let's first delve into a couple thoughts around the strategic fundamentals about a presentation that you're going to be on the hook to deliver. And the reality of the matter is that there's a lot of things you have to think about. You can't just throw together slides, throw up some charts, and hope that you can talk through it. But you've got to really give some forethought into what you're doing and why. And so this starts with a rather uncomfortable conclusion, which is one that took me years to come to understand. And just as background, you know, I was in the consulting realm for many, many years and had to deliver literally hundreds of presentations over that time. And I've done everything wrong you've seen here. I've seen others do it wrong. I've seen people do it right. But what really took me a long time to accept is that results are actually not the biggest factor in the success of a live presentation. In an ideal world, that would be true. And I'm certainly not suggesting that results aren't important. You absolutely, positively have to have solid, defensible results. But you're, in my opinion, actually at most halfway there at that point. The remaining 50% plus is how do you package, how do you present, how do you deliver and answer questions about that information. With a live audience, that's going to be what wins it over. So I like to say that solid results are, from our old math days, necessary but not sufficient. You've got to have good results, but good results in and of themselves do not guarantee you success. And this is something that can be hard to accept because we'd all like to think that all we need is to have the right facts and the right data. But in a live scenario with real people, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Another big thing that you have to remember as a technical presenter is that data literacy is a 2-way street. And this is super critical. I often hear data science teams, data engineering, et cetera, and they'll talk about their business sponsors. Oh, these people just don't get it, and it's so frustrating to talk to them because they're not understanding what I'm saying. And absolutely, that could be partially true. But if you look up the definition of literacy in the dictionary, it's not about just reading or receiving information. It's also about writing. It's reading and writing. It's delivering and receiving. And so while it is incumbent upon whoever it is we're presenting to attempt to get their knowledge and literacy up to a level that they're able to accept the information we're giving them, it's equally on each of you as a technical presenter to put your content at the right level and to deliver it, write it, and send it in a way that they can get it. So if I gave this exact same talk today to, say, an audience here and an audience at a high school, I'm obviously going to have to talk at a much different level for that high school audience. It's on me to recognize that the high school audience wouldn't be ready to take information at the same level of detail and depth that an audience here at a major conference would be able to take it. So that's what I'll leave you with is make sure you're trying to meet in the middle. Whenever you find yourself saying your audience just doesn't understand, I'm going to submit to you there's probably a lot more that you could be doing in order to help that audience understand. Probably the biggest mistake people make is, remember, a live presentation, it's about you presenting, having the audience see the information that you're delivering and allowing them to understand all those implications. Here's this common slide. I see things like this all the time. It's filled with writing, it's jam-packed, much of the text is small. I'm going to tell you right now, most everything on here you don't need to read. But I'll also tell you that many of you are still reading it, even though I told you not to, because it's hard to avoid reading through everything that is put up in front of you. But here's the worst part. Even if all of this information was relevant, every second that you're reading any information on this slide is one less second that you're listening to what I'm trying to tell you. It's one more second that you're distracted, that you've missed a key point, that you're not understanding it, and that you're possibly making some bad assumptions. So the more you draw the audience away from you, the worse. So let's just look at this example here. How can we clean this up for a live presentation? Let's assume for a minute I needed to get these points across. Really, it comes down to those 4 key orange boxes. I've got 4 actions to recommend. Alert leadership, and then I go through that. I can go through each of these individually, having them build out. I can say however much I want on each of these. But the presentation itself, the audience is distracted for but a fraction of a second in each point. So even though I might verbalize all sorts of detail, the slide keeps the attention on me. And this is really, really a critical thing to do. You have to remember that when you're doing the live presentation, that is not the time to show all the data that you would have put in a technical report. And we'll talk some more about that in a little bit. So let's say you're ready to get moving on a new presentation you've been assigned to do. The first step is you've got to design that presentation. You've got to figure out what is it that you're going to say, what level of depth are you going to cover it, what are the key points you want the audience to take away, and what type of actions you want them to take. That's a lot of work to do. I liken this to movie making. You don't have someone decide to make a movie and they just start randomly filming scenes and hoping that those scenes can be pasted together into a good movie. They actually very diligently lay out the entire script and the entire scene, who's moving where, what's happening before they start filming. You've got to do the exact same thing with your slides, and it'll save you a ton of time if you stop and plan up front. So one thing that's a little counterintuitive is we all like to think that our technical knowledge is impressive and is going to let us have an impact and have credibility. With a non-technical audience, it can actually go the other way. They often expect that maybe they won't be able to understand you and that you're not able to talk on their terms. And if you live up to that, they're just going to start to ignore you. But it can be easy to understand if we use an example. Let's say I go take my car into 2 different auto shops. I'm having a transmission problem. The first person at the first shop goes into the description of what he wants to do in order to fix the car, and he's like, well, I'll tell you what, given what I'm seeing, it could be anywhere from $800 up to $3,500, anywhere from a couple days to a week or 2. Full disclosure, we're having some supply chain issues right now still, and some parts aren't going to be readily available. Now, I don't think that'll apply to your transmission parts, but I just wanted you to know. Also, one of my key mechanics is out sick today. I'm hoping they're going to be back tomorrow, but obviously if they're not back tomorrow, then I might not be able to help you. Would you like to leave the car and I'll get back to you as soon as I can? Now, that person gave you a whole lot of detail. Now let's listen to mechanic number 2. Mechanic number 2 is very straight and to the point. Well, you know, this could be anywhere from $800 to a couple thousand. In my experience, it's probably around $800 to $900. I won't know until we take a look. If you leave the car, we'll get to it either late today or early tomorrow, and I can be back to you with a firm time and cost estimate. Would you like to leave your car with me? I'll bet you that most of you would leave it with that second person. And the reason is that they gave you confidence that they had a feel for what might be wrong and how to diagnose it, and that they would get back to you with the details when they had it. They didn't overhedge and give all sorts of technical details on what might or might not go wrong. They didn't go into all of the tests. The first mechanic probably would have told you about the various tests he would have run, attaching various devices to your car to test the transmission. You don't really care about that. You went to the expert because you want them to handle those things for you. That's what you have to remember. Your non-technical audience does not want to hear about all those technical details that you had to deal with. They don't want to hear about all of the trials and tribulations that the data caused you. They just want to have confidence that you took care of those things for them and that you have something that they now need to know. Now, another thing is to remember that your audience often won't, not being as technical as you are, won't ask questions the way that you might. So let's say I went into a car dealership. The car salespeople are very much into the technology, and I happen to look at the backup camera in a car, and I say, well, how does this work? That salesperson might think that that means I literally want to know how this backup camera works, and I might start hearing about, oh, it's phenomenal. This is the latest technology. We've got a super high def LCD high def screen. It's connected via an HDMI cable to some onboard GPUs that are constantly getting feeds from the such and such cameras. It goes through all this stuff. In the meantime, I'm sitting there thinking, I don't care about any of this. What I really meant when I said, how does it work, was how do I use it? What I wanted to hear was, oh, this is great. When you put it in reverse, you're going to see what's behind you. As you start moving, it'll show you where you're going. And if you start to hear it beep, you probably want to stop. Tying this to the data science realm. When you have a business sponsor, let's say you're doing a classic marketing 101 response model. Who's going to respond to an offer? And you build a standard model, like say a decision tree, random forest, logistic regression. And someone says to you from the audience, well, how does this work? They probably don't want to hear, oh, well, we run it through an algorithm that minimizes the error in this fashion and blah, 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 and go through all of this and how it works. What they really meant was, how do I use it? The answer you probably want to give is something along the lines of, oh, this is great because in this type of model, it's very easy. We're going to be able to rank all of your customers by their probability of response. You tell us how many people you want to contact, and we'll take the highest ranked ones up to that number. Great, done. So remember, when you're talking to a non-technical audience, make sure you're interpreting the questions they ask you and delivering an answer in the way that they would like to hear it, not the way that you would like to hear it. Now, I talked about cutting out the detail. There's a couple things you can do on this. And one is you can create a distinct leave behind document. For a multi-month project, you might literally do an entire separate paper or document that goes in immense detail. That's worth it for a major effort, but for smaller efforts, not so much. One of my favorite techniques is just to use the notes pages that are embedded within PowerPoint. You can go in and add a whole bunch of extra notes that you might talk to. In this case, I have a very simple bar chart. I might then talk to a variety of points that I could put in the note page below. What this enables me to do is keep the audience focused on me during the presentation, but when I give them the leave behind, when I'm done, they'll have that additional text so that it will remind them of the key points that I made. Now, another great benefit of this approach is when I go to review the slides myself, say prior to presenting, I can see all my notes and it'll refresh me. And this is something a lot of people don't use, but you can print out notes pages straight from PowerPoint. And a lot of people use slide masters. There's actually a separate note master as well where you can format it. But it's a real easy way to give that extra information in the leave behind that you think they're gonna need written down without having it junk up your presentation itself. And tied to that is you want to be showing the fewest numbers necessary at any point in your presentation. So here's a very simple table. It's 5 products by 4 quarters. That's 20 numbers plus the totals. I'm up to 29 numbers on this seemingly very simple chart. That's a lot to look at. If you look at my headline, it's saying organic honey grew by over 50% this past year. Now, if you look at this table and you concentrate, you can find that, you can see the pattern. But here's the problem. Anyone who's concerned about regular honey is now focused on all the regular honey numbers. The people interested in flavored honey are looking at those. Someone who's concerned about Q3 is looking at that. I've put all this extra information. It's going to distract people. It's hard for people to see it. What you want to do, pull out those specific numbers you're talking about for this headline, make it so obvious that they can't miss it. Now, what I might have is an entire series of slides where I cover various pieces from that big table. I might even cover every number in that big table, but I'm going to do them piece by piece, context by context. And at the end, I might say, by the way, I have a table of all of these numbers in one place if you'd like to see it later that you can review on your own, and then you move on. But you definitely want to cut these things down to the minimum because you don't want to overwhelm your audience with a ton of extraneous information. So let's say you've planned and you've designed your presentation. Now you've got to think about what are you going to say and how are you going to word it? One of the worst mistakes that technical people make is to use very technical words and terms. So here's a classic example from data science. If you're doing a model that's going to predict response, there's terms like accuracy, sensitivity, specificity. I can tell you I've been doing this for years. I still get confused as to which is sensitivity, which is specificity, because I don't use them outside of this context and they sound familiar. I promise you, your non-technical audience will have no idea what these mean. So you can verbally explain it to them at the time, and they might sort of kind of get it, but they'll totally forget later. So this is the kind of scenario, just put the layperson's language from the beginning. Instead of saying accuracy, say the percent correctly classified, right? Instead of sensitivity and specificity, it's a true positive and true negative rate. People will understand that much more live, and they'll also understand it when you come in later. So it's these little things that you can adjust that will make your presentation that much more impactful. Similarly, numbers and labels are very important. What numbers do you show? How do you label them? How do you format them? Well, one thing to do is to only use the precision you need in order to make your point. A lot of analytical packages are going to spit things out to 8, 10, 16 decimals. And a lot of people will pop that in there. So here I've got a headline, yummy flavor outsold yucky flavor 5-1. Do I really need dollars at the 509 million range down to the penny? And does anybody believe numbers at that range are actually accurate to the penny? Probably not. Similarly, the percents are way too small. I can clean this up a lot by putting it in 509 million versus 101 million and 83 versus 17. The reality is this gets across the point of the 5-to-1 ratio much more easily than the past. So resist that urge to just paste numbers from an analytical tool, which will almost always have a ton of decimals. Sometimes you might need those decimals. Often and most often you don't, so take them out. Another thing is, what are the charts and images that you're going to show? So one thing is to avoid your desire to show technical and architectural diagrams to a non-technical audience, other than if you show it really quickly as a way to say, look, we've got a bunch of fancy technical diagrams behind it, but I want to explain to you what they mean. I have over the years seen so many data folks and analytics folks want to be showing, data ERD diagrams, system architecture diagrams, and I can promise you, you can spend 5 minutes trying to explain it to the audience. Most of them won't get it, and in the end, what they're actually going to see is something that looks like this. You've got to figure out what is it in that architecture that non-technical audience needs to understand. What do you want them to take away? And then tell them those specific things. And again, if you want to show the diagram to prove you have it, do it for a second or two, but you don't want to put them up and leave them up. The audience, non-technical, doesn't care. So let's say you've gone through the design, you've done all of your prep and development. Now you got to prepare for that final presentation. And this is actually a really, really critical point that often gets overlooked. You've got to prepare. You've got to think through what you're going to say. You want to go through as a final dry run, making sure you know exactly how you're going to tie the slides together and what your points are going to be at any spot. And a great way to do that is to literally practice your presentation. I can tell you, very few people would submit a big paper, whether it's in school or at a company, with their first draft being submitted without going back over it. If you have a really important email you have to send to your boss or to an executive team, you probably draft it, think about it, and then edit it before you hit send. Yet I routinely see people show up to give a presentation, an important one, to a room full of people where they've clearly never actually done the presentation before. Literally, I've spent I don't know how many hours over the years in a hotel room the night before a presentation, just walking around that hotel room, presenting it to myself. And the key to that is I'm walking around, it feels awkward at first, but you get used to it. I'm making myself talk through my slides. I'm hearing what I'm saying. I'm stumbling at certain points, and I realize, boy, I have a really bad transition between slides 5 and 6, and I make an adjustment. I find that maybe my conclusions weren't as clean as I thought they'd be in the order I had them, and I might reorder. The point is, by forcing yourself to actually go through it and talk it through, you will end up being so much better off, and you will always find places that you can tune both your delivery, but even the slides themselves. Another big thing is focus on time, not slide counts. So many people get hung up on slide counts, and there's all sorts of guidelines, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes per slide. I've got slides I cover for 30 seconds, 10 seconds even. I've got slides I cover for 5, even 10 minutes. When you have a set amount of time, you figure out what you need to present, and you make sure you're in that time. Don't worry about how many slides there are, if the slides are going to flow and if they're going to make sense to the audience. Don't get hung up on arbitrary things and cut it down. Especially when you get into things like animations, the slide count's a little deceptive anyway, as you have various things building out that you could argue could have been a different slide anyway. So really focus on your content, what you need to say and how long you have to say it. Don't worry about the rest. Another thing is when you're doing your final preparation and you're going through that dry run, that's the perfect time to look at what do you need to make stand out even a little bit more. So with numbers, for example, here's a really basic table. There's only 4 numbers, but do you know exactly what I want you to focus on? There's a number of ways to help make this clear, and you can often identify this in your final prep. You can have little circles come on and circle the number you want the attention on. I can have it bolded and then have an arrow build out. I can actually have it zoom out in red to make it really clear where I want you to focus. The point is, even with 4 numbers, people can get distracted. This is going to let them know exactly where you want them to look. And the same lesson works with text. Now, I would never put 5 bullet points up simultaneously like this. I'd build them out one at a time and talk to them. But for the purpose of illustration, look at the various ways that you can highlight text. You can bold things, you can italicize things, potential lawsuits in red. You can make it easy for the audience to pick out the core point that you really want them to take away. So then it's time to give the presentation. And there's some really important things. The first thing that's counterintuitive is that, especially in an online presentation, you always have to look at your camera. And this is a really awkward thing because you often see all of the little thumbnails of everybody down below you. You have to resist looking at that. Even if you're talking to someone like in a job interview, if I look down, I'm going to come into the camera. I've been trying to stare right at this camera the whole time. Your brain perceives me as looking right at you. It's kind of like this woman here. You're perceiving I'm looking right at you and I'm doing a dialogue. Now let's say though, you asked me a question. So I look down to the bottom corner where your picture is. My brain, I'm looking right at you. I'm engaging with you. I'm making eye contact with you in my brain. I'm feeling like we're having an amazing conversation. On your end, you're seeing the side of my head and it looks like I'm ignoring you. Even worse is when people have a screen up above and now they're looking up here talking into the air. So you've got to force yourself to look at that camera. Whenever anyone asks a question, make sure you go back to it. And one question I've had in the past is, well, Bill, what's the point of a Zoom if you're not supposed to look at the people anyway? I'll tell you, I've wondered that to some degree. When you're listening, you can look at the people talking to you. When you're talking, look at the camera. Another point is stress the positive. All of us that are technical, we love to make sure that we're being thorough and that we're caveating things correctly. And you want to be honest, but don't throw cold water on what could be a great result. So here's a true statement, but it sounds a little bit negative, right? Given some unexpected data issues, we were unable to produce any results for the specialty category. You know, if I just went through some really good results, everyone's excited about a new initiative, and then I throw this out, that's a little bit negative. It's just a matter of saying the same thing more positive. So how does this sound instead? We have really high confidence that these results apply to every category except the specialty products category. We're in the process of validating if it holds there as well. In the meantime, why don't we get started with the rollout on the other categories? Right? The point is just how you say and position things can really make a difference. And the less technical your audience is, the more that they probably will benefit from you not putting unnecessary negative energy or caveats into the conversation. Also, make sure as you're doing your final presentation, you're always tying facts to an impact. Here's a terrific fact. If we're dropping complications by 10%, that sounds great. But in the end, you need to get more than that. You need to figure out how does that translate into hospitalizations and deaths, and equally or more important, cost per patient. Here it's really obvious there's a 20% reduction, there's a dollar value on that. If I don't make that linkage between the complications and the dollars, I run the risk of one of two things: that the audience doesn't do it and they don't understand the implication and they move on to something else because their day's busy, or a similar thing that could cause you trouble would be if they try to do it on their own and they got it wrong. So always tie it and make it obvious for them what they need to see. And last, often we're doing a project that's tactical at a given point in time. Tie it to a bigger thing. Maybe I've got a quarterly summary of results, back to our honey analysis. But if I'm also able to say, hey, everyone, keep in mind, while it looks like that we're set up for success next quarter with our promotional plan, remember that 2 of our 5 core strategic corporate initiatives in the coming years were both more direct consumer interactions and more organic honey business. Luckily, all of these plans we just talked about hit each of those as well. Now you've got that audience saying, wow, I'm going to get my bonus, I'm going to get my promotion. We're supporting the bigger picture. So look for those opportunities. And with that, I'll pause here. I know we had a limited time, and I went through obviously only a fraction of what was in there, but at this point, I think we have a minute or two for a couple of questions.
Many thanks, Bill, for sharing such interesting and I hope for everyone very useful insights. Let me see the Q&A channel. Just a reminder, please join our channel. Feel free to ask any questions. Currently, I don't see any questions in our Q&A channel.
Yeah, I guess in absence of that, I'll just reinforce one of the big themes here, which is that your presentation, the goal of your presentation isn't to put together and deliver something that you would want to see or that you're comfortable with. You have to put together what your audience would want to see and what they will be comfortable with. And obviously that can very much differ from what you would personally want to see. And if you're presenting amongst a technical team, you can go ahead and throw up some of those really technical pieces of information because that's audience appropriate. But in reality, in the business world, normally the most impactful funding decisions are made when you're delivering what you found to the executives, who again are normally not going to be very technical. And the better you get at getting them to trust you and take what you say as accurate and then do those actions, the better both you'll be and the company will be, and you'll end up in a much better spot.
Do you use video thumbnails to monitor comprehension and engagement while mostly talking into the camera?
Do I use it? So it depends on the platform. So like this platform here today, I can't actually see anybody. All I see is my slide, and I'm literally just talking to the pinhole. So it takes some getting used to. I've done this enough that it doesn't bother me, but a lot of people, it would be very hard to sit here and just talk into a pinhole and see nobody. Now, if I'm presenting and there is a live audience that I can see on the screen, again, I will, as I'm talking, I'll look into the camera. Maybe I pause for a second between slides. I might glance down like I'm doing now and look around and just make sure people seem engaged. Or particularly, my ideal presentation is a case where there's some interaction. When someone's asking me a question, that's my opportunity to look around, look at the audience, see if they're paying attention, if they seem engaged, and so forth. But you can cheat and look down briefly to look at the people, but the thing is, you have to remember to look back up, because once you look down, you tend to stay there because your brain naturally wants to be looking at the people, not at the pinhole.
Is asking, do you have any recommendations for switching between slides and live demos of software results? I understand it needs to fit in the broader narrative of a presentation.
I'm sorry, so can you read that again? I missed a couple of the words in that.
So the main part of the question, do you have any recommendation for switching between slides and live demos of software results?
Yeah, I think the key is if you're going to do, demos are always a risky thing because things can go wrong. Obviously, I'm going to assume you have your demo really locked down nicely. I think the demo should follow the same principles as I went through here. You don't want to do an exhaustive demo of every feature, every link, every possible place that you could go, but you want to know exactly what the key parts of the functionality you want the audience to see are, and then drill in on those and have a very tightly scripted, very short demo that goes where you want it to. Now, once you do that, you do run the risk that you start getting the audience questions and they drive you to other components of the software. That's okay if it's kept within the scope of what you want, but you have to be ready, whether it's slides or a demo, to pull the audience back at times and just say, hey, you know what? Our intent here was just to give you a brief overview of this. We can go deeper in the demo later, but we have some other things about the application we have to cover. So I think the key is just make sure that you've really figured out exactly what you want to show in the demo and keep it just as targeted as you're keeping the slides.
The last question from Lucinda. What about generating trust? Many people don't trust results of ML model. How can I build trust in the model by the people who have to make business decisions and have risk, especially if results are non-intuitive?
Well, that's the thing. I think you've got to, what you just hit on there is the big challenge. So I spent, back when I was running large analytics organizations, I spent more of my time, much more of my time building the relationships with my stakeholders and having conversations about the analytics that we were doing at the very 100,000-foot big picture level to prepare people for when we might come in with more results. And the key is you've got to find, back to it, they're coming to you as the expert to understand all of those nuances and all of those complexities under the hood. They need you to distill that down and tell them, here's the essence of what we found and here's why it's important to you. Now, if they literally just don't trust that you have any ability to get accurate results, I mean, that's a problem in and of itself. That's a credibility problem, whether either because you don't have this, either you don't have the skills or you do and you haven't yet proved it. And that's where you have to focus on, and I'm going to assume everybody here obviously would have the skills. So you have to focus on building that relationship so they trust you as an individual. They trust that you do have these technical skills. And if you have delivered multiple projects and those results have played out as you have promised, they're going to trust you by default on the next one. But it does take that effort. And so I always say, it's not a great idea if you've got a new stakeholder and you're presenting to them for the first time, to have that first interaction be a results presentation, because then they don't know you yet, they don't trust you as a person yet, let alone some of the technical results. That's where you want to maybe have lunch with that person ahead of time, find a way to bump into them in some other context so that they at least know you and have some baseline feel for what you're about and that they might be able to trust you. So when you're asking them to do it in the meeting, they'll be a little more ready to do that. But it takes a lot of effort and time to build that trust. And again, following a lot of these principles can help you do that, because you'll come across as that technical person who actually seems to understand their pragmatic problems and doesn't get too far in the weeds where you lose them. That builds trust in and of itself.